Raise the anchors. Lowers the sails. Man the cannons, Mr. Sparrow. Hoist the colors. Mr. Sparrow. Jack. Oh, is it that time already? Well, allow me to introduce myself. A very hearty ahoy there, matey. My name is J.D. Feuerstein. Or, as long as we sail these seas, that'd be Captain J.D. to you. Savvy? And I'm here today to talk to you about content licensing and the various challenges faced today within the gaming industry when it comes to monetization. The games and the companies that I will reference today are purely to point out industry examples of creative licensing and partnering. Now, you're probably wondering where I was, how I got there, and what exactly was I doing there? Well, let's go back a little ways to when our journey on the seas first began. Back in March of 2018, this game, Sea of Thieves, developed by Rare and published by Microsoft Studios, was released. The concept of the game was simple but ambitious. Give people the ability to simulate what it would be like to sail the high seas and cement your reputation as the greatest pirate you may have heard of. In its launch month, the game saw 283,000 active users on PC and 1.7 million on Xbox One, according to market research compiled by Superdata. Ever since then, they have steadily grown in player count to reach over 20 million players. According to the last count taken back in 2020, that translates to over 2 million units sold on Steam alone. Now, given the opening month numbers compiled by Superdata and combine that with those numbers of the 2 million on Steam, I think it's fair to say if we were to also include this year's numbers, as well as extending that to Xbox consoles as well, that it'd be far surpassing that 2 million unit count. The success of the game is in no doubt due to fantastic decisions made towards generating wholly original content, smart content licensing deals, and valuable streaming partnerships with people such as Summit1G and Pace Yourself 22, the former, according to Looper.com, being directly responsible for generating 8.19 million hours watched and an average concurrent viewership of 36,000 people in January of 2019 alone. All of that just on Twitch. Rare has since decided to up their game after making a surprise announcement at this year's E3 conference when they released a trailer with a very familiar cast of characters. This is where our journey really begins. Sea of Thieves, a pirate's life. With an inbound license deal inked, both Rare and Microsoft Studios were given a boost to their sales. So, sorry, just a little bit of pirate humor. Oh yeah, where were we? With an increase in content, Rare was able to build a unique set of stories better known as Tall Tales to the Sea of Thieves library. These original stories all revolve around the characters created by Disney for the hit franchise Pirates of the Caribbean, which was inspired by the 1967 ride originally constructed in Disneyland. Looking at this example from a licensing perspective is an interesting as it cuts across several different sources of intellectual properties and rights types. If we were to break it down, it's possible it could look a little bit like this.
If we were to take the role of the licensee, then we need to identify the property, the rights type, which could be a format, a category, or a usage type, territory, distribution channel, and language.
Now, if we were to take the same foundational rights attributes and apply it here to Jack, and if we were to make it more granular and scale it in a hierarchical fashion, we could end up with something like this.
I shall bow to my collegial nature and introduce myself. I'm Captain Jack Sparrow.
Under property, we have Pirates of the Caribbean, a character model, Jack Sparrow. Under the rights type, we have interactive media and 3D adventure game. For territory, it's worldwide. For our distribution channel, it's digital download across Steam, Microsoft Store, and the Xbox Microsoft Store, and it's in all languages.
Of course, models like the one we just reviewed also need to be flexible enough to capture different types of IPs as well. Let's take the set design and voiceovers pulled directly from the Disneyland ride shown here in-game. Note that we have two different types of intellectual property being applied here in addition to the character models.
Hey, send them hens to David Jones. It's the gold they want.
In addition to the Jack Sparrow character model, we also have Mercado's auction cast, followed by their set design, including the Mercado's auction, and then the audio, specifically Mercado's auction voiceover.
By having a way to model your creative licensing in a very granular way, game publishers can be both empowered with flexibility for content creation and know what they're licensed in and how exactly they've agreed to use that license. Now, I keep using the phrase inbound licensing. Some of you may be familiar with this concept, but for those of you who aren't, I'd like to expand on that for a moment. Inbound licensing is when you, acting as what's known as a licensee, reach an agreement with a content or intellectual property provider / owner to license in their content / IP, typically for revenue generating purposes. Now, we've already covered what some of these examples are in relation to Sea of Thieves, so what would that look like if we were to add in talent and voiceover licenses? Well, for starters, we can look at something like CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077. We identify here that CD Projekt Red is licensing in two unique pieces of intellectual property: Keanu Reeves' unmistakable talent likeness, as well as his voice.
Let's take a look at another example. Here we have EA Sports NHL 21. We can see that they've licensed in the NHL Shield, the Stanley Cup, the NHL team's various logos and style guides. But they've also licensed in player likeness from the NHL Player Association, as well as master and sync licenses for the music featured from various artists. Now let's consider a license that most people outside of the gaming industry tend to overlook, and that's for the actual production tools necessary to develop your game, such as a game engine. Let's take an example from a game developed by Unknown World Entertainment called Subnautica Below Zero, which uses a game engine called Unity. Given the size of the development team at Unknown World Entertainment, it's likely that they have a license agreement they manage for access to the Unity game engine that falls within their enterprise level package. This would require them to pay a flat annual license fee based on the number of users, typically with a minimum amount. On the flip side, games like Gearbox and Embracer Group's Borderlands 3 utilizes the Unreal Engine. Gearbox most likely maintains a license agreement with Epic Games, who owns the Unreal Engine, where they are then subject to a royalty percentage calculated by gross revenue from life-to-date sales rather than just an annual license fee. Finally, let's add a bit of a twist to this by compounding an inbound license with a wholly owned piece of IP, Lego Harry Potter the video game. Here, we have a few complexities. First, we need to recognize the parties involved. TT Games Limited as the game developer, which is a subsidiary of Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment, Lego as a licensor, J.K. Rowling as a licensor, and Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment as the publisher, which also happens to be a subsidiary of the parent company, Warner Bros. Entertainment. We can only imagine a complex set of license agreements created or shared between parties for the use of the Harry Potter universe in film, in video games, as Lego characters, and as Lego characters in video games.
Ultimately, the end goal from an inbound license perspective for a company is to maximize the revenue generating potential for each piece of licensed content. And when companies are faced with a seemingly overwhelming level of complexity, it's hard to keep track of all potential opportunities. Unless they have their license agreements broken down to the most granular detail in a systematic way, providing them an unprecedented level of visibility of what they've licensed in and what their associated financial obligations are. If they don't have that support structure in place, they're bound to be missed opportunities for further monetization or even inaccurate license/royalty payments. Now, keeping that in mind, let's take a moment to look at a fairly common model we see within the mobile gaming world.
Championing the way for augmented reality interactive entertainment, Niantic Inc. developed and released in July of 2016 the hit mobile game Pokemon Go. Within Pokemon Go, just like many other video games these days, there is what is called an in-game currency, in this case known as Pokecoins. Pokecoins is known as a premium currency because it is accompanied by an estimated real-world currency value. Pokecoins can be earned naturally in-game when a player controls a Pokegym for a defined period of time or by completing an adventure, after which the player can cash out to collect their earnings. These real-world currency for in-game premium currency transactions are facilitated by the Google Play or Galaxy Store on Android devices or by the App Store on iOS devices. Now, assuming that Niantic has a license agreement with the Pokemon Group established as a joint venture between Nintendo, Game Freak Co., and Creatures Inc., it would be reasonable to speculate that they're required to pay royalties based on transactions involving Pokecoin. In order to calculate the royalties that may be owed in this example, we first need to understand each element of the associated equation. First, we have our value, typically expressed in the form of a number. Then we have our operator, the mechanic that facilitates the calculation, typically in the form of add, subtract, multiply, divide, percentage, etc. Lastly, we have what we call our rate basis. The rate basis is what you're ultimately applying the forefront of the calculation against. With this understanding, let's look at how this applies to the Pokecoin transaction. Let's say that I purchase a bundle of Pokecoin, and that purchase is facilitated by the Google Store. And let's say the license agreement between licensor and licensee is something like 25% of net sales. Using what we just covered off on the basis of royalty calculation, we'll first define our value, 25, followed by our operator, percent, and then lastly, our rate basis, net sales. That would mean we would need to take the purchase amount, the $19.99 for the 2,500 Pokecoins, and first calculate the percentage of Google's cut. Then from there, calculate the 25% against the remaining balance. Then there are scenarios that include direct payment to more than one party, such as the case with Psyonix's Panic Button and Epic Games' Rocket League, where they have an option for a third-party content creator, such as Rocket Science, for the consumer to choose to receive 5% of the total purchase amount of every microtransaction made by them over a set period of time. To put this into perspective, wildly successful streamer Tyler Ninja Blevins let it slip on a Fortnite stream recently that he has earned over $5 million in a single month alone from this support a creator option. Now, I know it's a pretty simple calculation, but what happens when we add a layer of complexity into the mix? We've been seeing a lot of focus lately when it comes to video game subscription services. Some of the following players have already established their own game subscription service. Google for both their cloud game streaming service, Stadia, as well as their mobile app store, Google Play Pass, Microsoft's Game Pass and Game Pass Ultimate, a 2-in-1 game subscription service, as well as a cloud and local device streaming service, Electronic Arts' EA Play, Ubisoft's Ubisoft Plus, PlayStation's PS Now, the Nintendo Switch Online, Nvidia's GeForce Now, which users can actually link to their Steam accounts, Amazon's Luna, and now recently announced Netflix. Each one of these manages several license agreements with various companies, and within them could very well be a royalty calculation that is based on a number of key factors. There are a number of reasons why a game developer might want their game to be distributed on a game subscription service such as Microsoft's Xbox Game Pass. During an interview with Forbes, corporate VP of Xbox Sarah Bond shared that Game Pass subscribers spend 20% more time playing games, play 30% more games, play 40% more genres, and crucially, spend about 20% more on gaming overall. So a game's exposure is quite high, but how exactly do you calculate royalties back to original gaming content creators when it comes to subscription license deals? Well, according to an interview between Executive Vice President of Gaming at Microsoft, Phil Spencer, and The Verge last year, Phil was asked, how do you pay out developers? I'm a developer, I make a game, I say I'm going to put it on Game Pass, a customer pays you $14.99 a month. How do you decide how much to pay me, the developer? And Phil had responded, our deals are, I'll say, all over the place. That sounds unmanaged, but it's really based on the developer's need. One of the things that's been cool to see is a developer, usually a small to mid-sized developer, might be starting a game and say, hey, we're willing to put this in Game Pass on our launch day if you guys will give us X dollars now. What we can do is we'll create a floor for them in terms of the success of their game. They know they're going to get this return. Phil goes on to describe scenarios where additional complexities can arise depending on the overall remaining development of the game. In the interview, Phil provides an example of how Xbox might pay for the full production cost of the game, taking a much more traditional publisher approach while adding the nuance of a non-exclusive distribution, thus allowing the game developer to have their game sold on platforms that might be in direct competition with Xbox. Lastly, and most notably, he discusses agreements based on usage and monetization. This can potentially be based on in-game purchases or percentage of reoccurring players. The few key takeaways from that interview for me are, the approach varies from partner to partner. License fees are involved depending on the state of the development the game is in. Calculations are done based on usage, microtransactions, or a combination of the two, and that ultimately revenue sharing is a possibility. Now let's build a deal with a gaming company with their game subscription service in mind. I'm developing a game called JD's Wicked Awesome Game, and my development is 75% of the way complete. The game subscription service company makes an assessment of the cost for the remaining 25% and decides to fund me the remaining amount. Let's say that comes to be about $2,500, but only if my game, which I'm sure we'll all agree will be a huge hit, is featured on their service. After I review their terms, I agree with the one caveat that in addition to the $2,500 funding, that I'd also like to have a revenue share model based off of the number of downloads and the active users in my game. So from a model perspective, this would look like the total monthly subscription revenue times the percentage of downloads of my game times the percentage of monthly active players in my game times the royalty percentage. It's easy to see just how complex things can become when looking at different ways to manage and monetize your content in the gaming industry. And to think, all of what we've covered off is only one side of the coin. Now with that in mind, let's take a quick look at the other side of the licensing coin, which is commonly referred to as outbound licensing. This is when we have original content created such as music, characters, stories, production elements, etc., and we're now acting as the licensor, i.e. the content creator / IP owner, and licensing those out for usage in any of the ways that we've covered off before, including game-to-game licensing, like when Square Enix licensed their Final Fantasy VII character Cloud to Nintendo to be featured in their latest installment of their franchise game, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, or licensing to a tabletop game like Epic Games' Fortnite to Hasbro to create Fortnite Monopoly Edition, or licensing apparel such as Bungie using Destiny 2 to license out to Arc 8 to create the Europa Tech hoodie, or collectibles, an example being Activision and Infinity Ward's Call of Duty Modern Warfare character Captain Price, licensed to McFarlane Toys for a 7-inch highly detailed recreation figurine, or licensing content to be published in a book like Halo Infinite's creator 343 Industries has out to Dark Horse Books for their book title, The Art of Halo Infinite, or even film adaptations such as Crystal Dynamics' Tomb Raider to MGM and Warner Brothers Studio. The possibilities are virtually endless. The real kicker here is that you need to keep track of all of what you've licensed in or out, how that content is being used, and what the overall impact of that is. And the best way to see that is being able to capture all key data points and pair them with high quality reporting. Every company should be able to easily aggregate these data points from a well-structured, flexible, and yet easily configurable rights and royalty managed system. And by doing so, they'll be able to really stand up dollar figures against decisions such as the cost savings with dynamically generated licensor-specific statement report templates versus manually aggregating and formatting the data required to be reported in each pay cycle to each specific licensor. Or how much time and investment is spent on printing and mailing or emailing out statements and general communications, not to mention the pain of your licensors and talent having to endure while stuck in this antiquated process, versus having all your licensors and talent partners receive automatic statement notifications directly via email, view and download important documents securely, and receive in-app notifications in a secure self-service statement portal. Or perhaps there are even larger impact variables to potential revenue growth, like the overall revenue performance of a singular piece of content broken out into the unique foundational rights attribute combinations we reviewed earlier, or reducing brand recognition continuity by not securing the rights for talent likeness due to artistic reasoning, or allowing users to rebroadcast non-licensed music, or giving streamers the ability to disable licensed music, or keeping track of licensed or non-licensed content you want to use in your game, or being able to properly set expectations by dialing in your forecasted royalty expenses, or seeing if they have the licensing rights for a specific territory, or ultimately what the estimated market value for a game character's cameo might be. Licensing IP for video games with a combination of licensing content in and licensing content out is a powerful mechanism for a game publisher to create a competitive advantage for their games and build out new revenue streams. However, it is important to have a robust infrastructure for managing the IP licenses and royalties in order to support and maximize on that innovation.
If you'd like to know more about how our software can help you monetize your IP, maintain compliance, accurately calculate royalties, and communicate with your talent, find out more by reaching out to us at FADEL.com. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I heard a nice pint of grog calling my name at that tavern over there yonder.